the lighthouse keeper who built the tower before anyone lived there. What the records show that economics textbooks refuse to explain. There's a filing system in the National Archives that contains shipping manifests, construction contracts, and lighthouse commission reports from 1789 to 1852. Not summaries, original documents, thousands of pages detailing the location, cost, and justification for every federally funded lighthouse built during America's early maritime expansion. The lighthouse establishment, created by Congress in the Lighthouse Act of 1789, was America's first public infrastructure program. Between 1789 and 1852, they built 331 lighthouses along American coastlines. Then they filed the records in Washington, where they sat mostly unconsulted for over a century. I found them because I was looking for something else. I was researching the economic development patterns of American port cities, trying to understand why certain harbors thrived while others failed despite similar geographic advantages. The same question economists keep avoiding. But the deeper I went into those shipping records, the more I realized the cities weren't the real story. The lighthouses were. Because those construction documents revealed something no economic model could explain. Over 200 lighthouses were built in locations where no towns existed, no ports, no settlements, just coastline, forest, and the towers going up anyway. Let me explain what I mean by before the towns existed. Consider the math. A lighthouse built in 1808 that sparked a town incorporated in 1842 represents a 34-year gap. That's not unusual. That's the pattern. An infrastructure investment made 3 decades before the economic activity that supposedly justified it. And the people who commissioned these lighthouses, the Treasury officials and lighthouse superintendents who signed the contracts, they knew exactly what they were doing. They were building the future, not responding to the present. But standard economic theory says infrastructure follows demand. You don't build the factory before the workers arrive. You don't pave the road before the cars exist. And you definitely don't erect a lighthouse in the wilderness and then wait 30 years for ships to need it. Except that's exactly what happened. 200 times. Boston Light, America's first lighthouse, was built in 1716 on Little Brewster Island. Boston was already a thriving port. That makes sense. Cape Hatteras Light in North Carolina was authorized in 1794 and completed in 1803. The nearest town, Buxton, wasn't incorporated until 1873, 70 years later. St. Augustine Light in Florida was built in 1824, the city of St. Augustine existed, but the lighthouse was placed on Anastasia Island, an uninhabited barrier island accessible only by boat. No roads, no bridge, no reason for maritime traffic significant enough to justify federal funding unless someone knew that traffic was coming. Minot's Ledge Light in Massachusetts was completed in 1860 on an exposed rock formation 1 mile offshore from Cohasset. The town of Cohasset in 1860 had a population of approximately 2,100 people. Not a major shipping hub, not a center of commerce, a small coastal village. Yet the federal government spent $300,000, equivalent to roughly $9 million today, to build a lighthouse on a submerged ledge that required 5 years of construction in some of the most dangerous waters on the Atlantic coast. The lighthouse was built with interlocking granite blocks, dovetailed and pinned together, an engineering feat that rivaled anything in Europe, for a town of 2,100 people that had no deep water port. The National Archives holds the correspondence. In 1855, the Treasury Department received a petition from Cohasset residents requesting the lighthouse. The petition was signed by 47 people. 47 signatures to unlock $300,000 in federal money. The approval came within 6 months. Construction began immediately. Compare that to the decades-long fight to fund the Transcontinental Railroad, a project with obvious national importance, or the years of debate over canal systems that connected actual cities with actual trade. But a lighthouse for 2,100 people on a rock ledge a mile offshore, approved in 6 months. Here's what matters for this investigation. The lighthouse wasn't built for Cohasset. It was built for the ships that would come later. And those ships did come, but not because of Cohasset. They came because of Boston's expansion, because of the China trade routes, because of the transatlantic shipping boom that transformed the Massachusetts coast in the 1870s and 1880s. Someone in the Treasury Department in 1855 knew that was going to happen. They built the lighthouse 15 years early. That wasn't the only unexplained construction. Between 1820 and 1860, the lighthouse establishment built 73 lighthouses in locations classified in federal documents as remote, unpopulated, or accessible only by water. These classifications come from the Treasury Department's own reports to Congress. Remote means no town within 10 miles. Unpopulated means fewer than 500 residents in the nearest settlement. Accessible only by water means no roads, no overland routes, nothing but boats. 73 lighthouses in 40 years. Built in places where the economic justification didn't exist yet. Point Reyes Light in California was completed in 1870 on a cliff 300 feet above the Pacific. The nearest town, Point Reyes Station, had a population of roughly 150 people and wouldn't see rail service until 1875. The construction costs were astronomical. Workers had to haul materials down a cliff using a hand-cranked tramway. They built housing for the keepers because no one could commute. The lighthouse served a shipping lane that barely existed in 1870, but that would become critical to San Francisco's trade network in the 1880s. Someone knew, someone planned for it, someone authorized the money. Bass Harbor Headlight in Maine was built in 1858 on Mount Desert Island. The town of Bass Harbor didn't exist. The area was forest, fishing camps, and seasonal settlements. The lighthouse was constructed on federal land specifically acquired for that purpose, in a location so isolated that supplies had to be delivered by boat 4 times a year. Mount Desert Island wouldn't see significant development until the 1880s, when wealthy families from Boston and New York began building summer estates. But the lighthouse was already there, waiting, guiding ships to harbors that hadn't been dredged yet, marking channels that hadn't been charted, serving an economy that didn't exist. Pemaquid Point Light in Maine, finished in 1835, was placed on a rocky peninsula where the nearest village, Bristol, had fewer than 400 residents. The lighthouse construction contract specified that the tower be built to withstand what the document called anticipated heavy maritime traffic. In 1835, the traffic didn't exist. Bristol wasn't a deep water port. It wasn't a fishing hub. It was a farming community. But the lighthouse went up anyway, its lens imported from France, its construction supervised by federal engineers who stayed in the area for 8 months. 20 years later, Bristol's harbour would handle the limestone trade that built half of Boston. The lighthouse was waiting. In 1837, Congress ordered an investigation into the lighthouse establishment. They wanted to know why costs were so high and why lighthouses were being built in locations with, quote, insufficient maritime traffic to warrant the expenditure. The investigation was led by a naval officer named Captain Matthew Perry, the same Perry who would later force Japan to open trade with the United States. Perry's report, submitted in 1838, is preserved in the National Archives. It's 47 pages long, and buried in the appendices is a table listing every lighthouse built between 1820 and 1837, along with an estimate of the number of ships that used each light annually. 31 lighthouses on that list served fewer than 50 ships per year. 11 served fewer than 20. 3 served fewer than 10. And one lighthouse, built in 1829 on a barrier island off the Georgia coast, served an estimated 4 ships per year. The construction cost was $14,000, equivalent to roughly $450,000 today. That's over $100,000 per ship per year in modern dollars. Captain Perry noted the discrepancy. He did not, however, recommend shutting the lighthouses down. He recommended building more. His reasoning, preserved in the report, is telling. Perry argued that lighthouses were not reactive infrastructure, they were speculative infrastructure. The phrase he used was providential investment. He wrote that the federal government had a duty to anticipate maritime expansion and provide the navigational aids necessary to make that expansion safe and profitable, even if current traffic did not justify the cost. Congress accepted the recommendation. Funding increased. His reasoning, preserved in the report, is telling. Perry argued that lighthouses were not reactive infrastructure. They were speculative infrastructure. The phrase he used was providential investment. He wrote that the federal government had a duty to anticipate maritime expansion and provide the navigational aids necessary to make that expansion safe and profitable, even if current traffic did not justify the cost. Congress accepted the recommendation. Funding increased. And then there's the timing. Between 1848 and 1852, the lighthouse establishment built 41 lighthouses on the west coast. 41. In 4 years. California became a state in 1850. The gold rush started in 1849. But the first lighthouse, Alcatraz Island Light in San Francisco Bay, was authorized in 1848 and completed in 1854. Before California was even a state, the federal government was already planning the lighthouse network. They built lights at Point Loma, Battery Point, Point Pinos, Fort Point, Farallon Island, and a dozen other locations where towns didn't exist and wouldn't exist for another 10 to 20 years. Point Loma Light, completed in 1855, was built on a 400-foot high bluff overlooking San Diego Bay. San Diego in 1855 had a population of fewer than 1,000 people. It wasn't a port, it wasn't a city. It was a failed mission settlement and a U.S. Army outpost. The lighthouse was designed to be visible 25 miles at sea, a range that served shipping routes connecting San Francisco to Latin America, but those routes weren't fully operational until the 1860s. The lighthouse sat there for 5 years, lighting empty ocean, waiting for the economy to catch up. The economic theory doesn't work. Infrastructure investment, according to every model taught in universities, follows demand. You build after the need is proven. You don't spend federal money on speculative construction in the wilderness. You especially don't do it 200 times across 60 years in a country that was constantly arguing about whether the federal government even had the constitutional authority to fund internal improvements. And yet the lighthouses went up. In places with no people, no ports, no traffic, just coastline and the certainty that someday someone would need the light. Here's what I keep coming back to. There was a lighthouse keeper, there had to have been, standing in a tower on the California coast in 1856, watching empty ocean every night. No ships, no sails, just waves and darkness. He was paid a federal salary to maintain a light that served almost no one. His supply boat came once a month. He lived in isolation. And every night he climbed the stairs, lit the lamp, and kept the light burning because somewhere, someone had decided this mattered. The economic models say he shouldn't exist. The textbooks say infrastructure follows demand, not the other way around. But the lighthouse keeper was there. And 10 years later, 20 years later, the ships came, the towns grew, the ports opened, and no one remembered that the light was already burning before any of it existed. The National Archives still has the construction records, contracts, costs, locations, justifications. They've been publicly available since the 1960s when the Coast Guard transferred historical documents to federal archives. They're searchable, they're readable, and I have to wonder, has anyone actually mapped them? Has anyone overlaid the lighthouse construction dates with the town incorporation dates and the port development timelines? Has anyone calculated the gap between when the money was spent and when the economic return began? Because the records don't lie. 200 lighthouses, built early, built in anticipation, built with a certainty about the future that no economic model can explain unless someone knew what was coming. And if they knew, how did they know? Who planned the expansion? Who drew the maps before the ship sailed? Who authorized the money before the towns existed? The lighthouses are still there. most of them anyway. Automated now, no keepers. But the towers stand, older than the cities around them, marking a pattern of development that the economics textbooks refuse to explain. Providential investment, Captain Perry called it, but providence implies faith, not knowledge, and the lighthouse construction records suggest knowledge. Specific, detailed, 30-year advanced knowledge of where ships would sail, where ports would thrive, where America's maritime economy would concentrate. Someone knew, someone planned it, and the lighthouses went up, one after another, lighting coastlines where no one lived yet, guiding ships that hadn't been built, serving an economy that existed only in the minds of whoever was drawing the maps. The light was always burning. We just arrived late.